Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming back again to day 3 of Brain Trust for those who've been here early in the week, or welcome to those of you who might be joining us for the first time today. We've got a couple of sessions this morning. So first of all, we have Darren Brown. I'll introduce Darren in a second at 10 o'clock. And then at 11 o'clock, we've got a hack hour session, which is a chance for you to give us some feedback about LT and things you'd like to see developed in the future. So Darren is an education technologist in life science at the University of Bradford. He's been working with and supporting both research and teaching for many years with ADI equipment, and his current focus is looking at LT as a medium to support practical teaching activities across the multidisciplinary faculty. So I'm going to hand over to Darren for his presentation on transition to LT year 1.
Morning, everybody. As Mike said, my name is Darren Brown. I'm an educational technologist working at the University of Bradford. I work in IT services and I'm a life sciences specialist. My background's in industrial instrumentation, so I come from an instrumentation background rather than from a life sciences background. And my role sits where applications meet the real world. I work with academics to work out how to teach with technology, whether that's hardware or software. The role as a hardware laboratory, teaching bias to it, and it's really to try and get good technological teaching into undergraduate teaching. I've been supporting ADI equipment in pharmacology research for quite a long time, setting up data acquisition units, the filters and settings, building rigs and setups for that research side. And when we chose to start replacing our pen recorders with chart, those skills transferred into undergraduate teaching, and that's where we really started getting into LT. So within life sciences, I support our integrated life sciences learning centre, which is digital pathology. In there we have patient simulators, anatomy resources, anatomage tables. And it's about, my role is about trying to leverage those into undergraduate teaching. So life sciences comprises of pharmacy, clinical sciences, biomedical sciences, chemistry, archaeological sciences and forensics. And my role has a little bit of a crossover into the school health, and I support Harvey, who should be on channel today, and Harvey has a similar role for the health school. So as I say, my involvement with ADI equipment started in that research using the power labs back then. There were Mac labs, so I've been there for quite a long time. And we run lots of organ baths in pharmacology. So as I say, we're building rigs to set up and calibrate transducers, setting files. So we then decided to refurbish 2 of our undergraduate pharmacology wet labs, which we knew we were going to use chart, so we were going to replace the type of equipment that we can see on screen there, the sort of standalone spirometers and ECG machines. So early doors, we decided that we were going to put a networking computers on every station because we were preparing for chart and computer teaching. So initially, the laboratories were set up to use ADI chart. So as I say, we were replacing the pen recorders. So we're bringing the isolated tissue with chart. Then the university made a decision to remove isolated tissue from undergraduate teaching. And this sort of prompted us into a little bit of a rethink about how we were going to teach in those laboratories. So this saw a move to more human physiology-based experiments, and this really prompted us to start to use Lab Tutor. And Lab Tutor allowed us to replace all the standalone equipment, so it's teaching spirometers, vitalographs, and ECG and the like, with a single unit with lots of transducers, a really small footprint. So we were starting to get to be really advanced in the way that we were using the technology to teach. So as for Lab Tutor, we sort of learnt our trade for LT in Lab Tutor. So all those experiences for Lab Tutor really applicable to LT Career Cloud, because we're sort of delivering the same sort of the teaching. So we have around 40 power labs in life sciences. We have 3 types of power lab. We have 2 channels and 4 channel power labs, and we've got 2 versions of 4 channels. We tend to author as experiments for 4 channels that allows us to swap around those 4 channels power labs, so that they're interchangeable in the experiment. The teaching power labs have a built-in bioamp, which we use for ECGs. The standard 4 channels doesn't have the bioamp in it, so we need to author so that we can swap those out and use them as we need. We don't use those 2 channels that much because as experiments are not authored to use 2 channels. So whilst we were working with Lab Tutor and we were delivering as teaching, we took feedback from students live in the laboratories. So my role is not a direct teaching role, so I had time to wander around in the laboratories whilst the students were teaching. And we were trying to find out what the students liked about Lab Tutor, what we got right and what we'd got wrong. We were sort of looking for the Goldilocks balance, if you like, between instruction and activity. When we started with Lab Tutor, we were far too wordy with his instructions, so students were finding it difficult to carry out experiments, and then we'd sort of roll back and be a little bit sparse with it. So working with students to understand how an experiment should be laid out were really useful. Fortunately, students are really quick to criticise, so we got some really good feedback. A nice thing about using Lab Tutor in the laboratories is that we set up to, so we teach to between 30 and 60 students in the lab at the time, and we teach in groups of 3 to 5. So those students work in their own groups in the laboratories, and they can work at their own pace in that laboratory. And academics have time to interact with students. With the old setup, academics would be spending the time delivering the experiment and sitting, and we'd have students not engaged in the class whilst we were waiting to go on to equipment. But now with Lab Tutor, because we've got so many power labs and we've got plenty of transducers to put there, the students are active all the time, so the labs run much better with power labs and Lab Tutor. So a jump off point when we started to think about the transition to LT. So as experiments, we'd been writing, so as laboratory refurbishment, I think it was around about 2012, and that's when we started to use CHAR. A couple of years after that, we started to move into Lab Tutor. So we'd authored experiments, and as experiments have been stable for about 3 years, we sort of gotten to a point where we didn't need to make any changes, other than small changes to look at if a laboratory session were shrunk to a 2-hour session instead of 3 hours, we could check things out. But basically, as core experiments were stable. We have around about 7 core experiments, which is a mix of blood pressure, ECG, respiration, autonomic, nervous systems, muscles, and urology. And in those experiments, we have a mix of ADI experiments which we've tailored to match our learning outcomes, and we have in-house written experiments as well. So we have experiments that we use with this patient simulator, where we write custom scenarios and medications for ISTAN, and we run a piece of software alongside LT, so students are using 2 pieces of software at the same time to capture data. And we're using LT as a guide for that particular practical. And we moved some of our research inhaler teaching experiments into Lab Tutor. These were sort of the last couple of experiments that we did before we made the change to LT. So these were the last ones, and we've run those for a couple of years, so they were nice and stable. So we had a really good base of experiments to sort of transfer into LT. As core experiments, we run across life sciences, so we have different forks of those experiments. So the core pharmacy experiments that we run have a slightly different version that we run in clinical sciences or biomedical sciences, but fundamentally all the experiments have the same core activities within them. So we were nice and stable, we were ready to change, so we started on the case to purchase LT. Quite a long, drawn-out process. We were really prompted to make this start because it was getting fairly evident that Lab Tutor were coming to its end of life. And because we had so much investment in the ADI equipment, we obviously needed to look to LT as that replacement. Whereas I say, it took us over 2 years to get to the place where we actually managed to purchase LT. Lots of difficulties. So part of the difficulty is getting management to understand why we wanted to move from our free Lab Tutor license. So initially we run Lab Tutor in the requires Lab Tutor license mode, requires Power Lab license mode. So management had a difficulty understanding why we wanted to go from this free use to a paid model. And we're persistently asking us, can't we just keep using it? It doesn't cost us anything, can we just keep using it? But it was difficult to get them to understand this end of life and the issues that we were going to come across with as operating systems. Another difficulty was trying to get them to understand the difference between LT Cura Cloud and a learning management system. Why do you want to use LT when you can ask questions and deliver resources on Canvas? Canvas is our LMS. Really difficult to put that across. Eventually, we ended up in a situation where as main levers for sort of enabling the purchase for life sciences was the fact that we had around £200,000 worth of ADI hardware. We were about to, and we were just in the process of going through an IT services restructure, which we're going to see as a switch to Windows 10, which was already causing us problems with Lab Tutor. And in that IT services restructure, the software maintenance and support strategy didn't really support the way that we worked with Lab Tutor. They weren't happy that we were running a zoned server. They didn't like the way that Life Sciences delivered the software to the students. So it didn't match with theirs, whereas LT and the cloud-based system mapped really well to how IT services were about to change. And because we had this £200,000 worth of ADI software, one of the questions, if not LT, then it was going to be a significant alternative investment in both time and money to replace its hardware and to replace the experiments. About the same time that we were doing this, the School of Health were reviewing Lab Tutor. They considered dropping Lab Tutor at that point. They were using Lab Tutor in the same mode that we were doing that requires Power Lab. And they were finding it difficult to actually find space to deliver or why they were delivering. So they didn't show, they couldn't see much use for Lab Tutor. But we arranged a meeting with ADI to demonstrate LT and to show the potential of LT as a distance learning type tool. And we looked at the content and all the non-lab based content, and I think that pretty much persuaded Health that it was something that they should consider. And we got into a stage where Health actually purchased LT before Life Sciences, so although Health were the minor user for the institution, they took the decision before Life Sciences they could see the benefit and went for that. So now both life sciences and health have LT. We have 1,100 licenses in the institution, 600 for health, 500 for life sciences. And my understanding is that health are probably now going to start to look at expanding their number of licenses because they're starting to use it more and more. Health, as I say, health are now the larger user than life sciences. They're developing more custom lessons than life sciences, and they are all non-laboratory use. It gives them a wider scope of how to use LT than life sciences has. Life sciences is still pretty much your perception of LTs. It's linked to laboratory practical use. So we're not seeing much significant use outside laboratory. But post-corona, there is a growing interest in LT, in life sciences, to start to use it outside the laboratory. So to get to LT from Lab Tutor, because for life sciences we had no change of content, so we were going to do a simple lift and shift. So we started the process by looking at the new content that ADI had for LT to see what we could use, swap, borrow, add. We added some really good cardiovascular and respiratory content from AD to our experiments, and we managed to get a couple of ADI's pre-lab lessons brought into our curriculum. We modified most of them to meet our learning outcomes. Fairly straightforward operation there. And pretty much substituted ADI's new skeletal muscle experiment with a few edits, as it was much better than the one that we had, which was based on the old ADI muscle twitch experiment. We opted to do all this lesson conversions in parallel. So instead of taking a lesson and converting it across, completing that, and deploying that and starting the next one, we just decided to take it all in one huge block. So we had a sort of a 4-pass process where we just start off with a rough copy where we just cut, copy, pasted everything from Lab Tutor into LT. So it was sort of a 2-monitor process. So Lab Tutor on one monitor, LT on another monitor. I just cut, copy, paste. So make sure your mouse is serviced, plenty of coffee. Pretty tedious task, many days, cut, copying and pasting across. But we've got them all across. And then once we got that, because there's a difference in the layout between Lab Tutor and LT, because we have this predominantly laboratory data acquisition capture processing for the majority of the experiments, we use a widescreen format for Lab Tutor, which is different layout to what we see in LT. So we have to significantly change our layout. We found it a little bit difficult to squeeze all that onto one page. The students that we have don't have a lot of access to instrumentation. I don't use instrumentation that much. So a screen format for Lab Tutor tended to be a really nice wide trace capture display across the top of the screen, some data panels to capture data into in the lower left and lower right. We had an explanation of how to do that data capture. So we tried to replicate that. A little bit difficult in the constrained screen sizes, but we managed to do something. And this third pass, we then went back and we updated all those instructions to use the terminology that we use in LT, because the way that you make measurements and the tools that you use are different across the two packages. And within our original Lab Tutor experiments, we used some cross-referencing to traces by coloured text. So if we grab a blue trace, we'd write in blue text. We lost the ability to do that, so we had to do some some new instructional graphics, and some new descriptive way of getting the students to understand which traces they're going to make a movement from. And then, as last part was, as fourth pass was, we went into chart. We generated all the setting files so that we could import them into as data capture panels. So we did that. We made a little bit of a mistake by we didn't record any example data at that time. So as experiments don't contain example data at the moment, but that was a relatively straightforward pass. And then finally, we trialed our experiments. We made any corrections, and then they were ready to deploy. So the next part is building courses. This is relatively new to us. We didn't, in Lab Tutor, this process doesn't really exist. So this is something new for us to build. So cost management in LT is really simple, really straightforward to do. We use sections a lot, really useful. Somebody at ADI needs an Employee of the Year award for developing sections. Really helps managing students. One of the things early doors that we had issues with is the difference between publishing a lesson and updating the course. We kept generating lessons that kept popping up and appearing everywhere. But once you get used to the terminology and the process, it's relatively simple. And then something new for LT that we didn't have in Lab Tutor is the lesson tiles, and you can see some lesson tiles that we've produced on this page. What we decided to do is we decided to try to make things consistent so that when a student logs on, the course has a consistent look and feel to it. So we stole ADI's tile style and modified that to suit us. So we're trying to show what's in the experiment so that the students have an understanding of what they're about to do. We were late to LT, so we missed our Canvas integration out. Canvas was a new LMS to the university at that time, and academics were busy learning Canvas, and we felt that it were probably too much of a burden to add an extra layer whilst we were learning this new system. So we opted not to do that. Hopefully we'll switch it on this year. And when we generated these courses, we opt to name as courses and sections to match as module codes, so that when we do switch as integration on, it'll directly drive into Lab Tutor. LT will be nothing that we need to do. So at the moment, all we're really doing is we're using sections to manage students, and as LMS integration will hopefully come this year, or next academic year. So lessons that we've learned. So there are not so many not so good lessons. LT is nice and easy to use, but from a life sciences, lab practical perspective point of view, and from the bad habits that we learn in Lab Tutor, these are a not so good list. So text formatting, as I said, we use the text formatting where we associate things through colour to traces. We've resorted to using SVG images to include more colour and tighter links with some of those icon imagery within our experiments. Things that have got cautions and warnings, don't do that. We wanted it to emphasise and stand out. The limited text editing in LT is a good thing as well as a bad thing. It's probably more good than bad. As I said, we use the loss of sort of using that colour to relate text address is problematic for us a little bit. As I said, as students, are not used to instrumentation, so we need to give them as many cues as we can to make measurements. Probably one of those bigger issues, which is not an LT issue by any stretch of the imagination, is students have problems remembering usernames and passwords. Compounded a little bit by because we use single sign-on at Bradford. So in a single sign-on, we missed the dot out of the email address. So when students are logging onto LabTutor, they have to use their email address. They're trying to use a single sign-on address. We were finding that we could burn up to 20 minutes in a lab session trying to get students onto LT. So we sort of adopted a policy where, whilst the students are mustering prior to getting to the laboratory, we're out in corridor asking them, have you accepted your LT invite? Can you remember your username and password? You know what your email is? So well, that's something that's, I don't know how we solve that one, really. That's not an LT issue as such. As I say, for us, we really liked our widescreen, high-resolution landscape screen format for doing our in-lab work. We even considered rotating these monitors into portrait mode to try and get a little bit more real estate on those monitors. But because we use these labs for other IT activities, that were really a non-starter for us. But that's not too bad. You need to use chart to build your setting files. Again, not that much of a problem because you don't build that many of them. It's just that in LabTutor, we've got used to being able to do things within LabTutor. And now we need to break out, go to chart, record a set of files and then bring them back in. So not quite as slick, but not that much of an issue. And we deliver some ECG experiments, such as for us paramedics, for instance, when they look at an ECG, they use the trace background, the trace squares on the background to do a ready reckoning so that we can do quick calculations on their traces. We don't have access to ECG trace squares, and that's giving us a little bit of a problem in engaging with some of the ECG experiments because that background trace. Minor niggles, but not many. So it's good lessons learned. LTs are really easy to work with. It doesn't have a lot of features, which makes it really quick to learn. Administration's straightforward. It's quick to sort issues in administration to add people, to resend invites, to move experiments around. Nice and simple and straightforward. It has nice simple layout tools with minimal options. There's no unnecessary features. That restriction is really good because it makes it easy to author modern looking and consistent content. So it's really nice. The look and feel across LT is always there across it because you sort of can't get too creative, if you like. I think I'd recommend people build an image bank. We use lots of PowerLab imagery again and again. And the drag and drop screen format templates, we generate them in as SVG files, so they're easy to replicate and recycle into other ones. So that's a really useful thing. For LabTutor, we used to keep all those images in the experiment, so we had one experiment and one set of images, and then we'd replicate whatever images into the other experiments. I think for a consistent look and feel, we've started to look at the image bank containing the images that we use across all those experiments, so it's consistent. And then the specific ones that we use in each experiment, we keep them in subdirectories specifically for that experiment. The ADI pixel grid sheet, which is on screen, is really useful. That's a good place to start. So whenever you're about to generate any graphics, you have the width that LT will break your image down into. So it gives you a good start for what you should be designing as far as your width to height ratio for your your imagery. Um, so editing in LT is really good. It's really quick. We had one instance where we were about to deliver a paramedic experiment in ECG. We were going to deliver that on Lab Tutor. We had a set of contractors in who severed our power to a server about an hour before the lab session were about to start. So we had students already mustering to come into that lab. We actually took one of our LT experiments that we were working on for pharmacy, and whilst the students were walking into the room, we were editing and modifying the experiment, changing the data panels, changing the learning outcomes in it, and then we built a course and delivered the experiment. A really quick 20 minutes. We sent invites out in that same session, so really we lost very little time. It's just an example of how quick. That isn't something that we could have done with Lab Tutor, so it's really nice. So useful tools. Dual screen computer is really helpful for editing content, so that you can work on your graphics or your text on one screen and have LT open on the other screen, so you can just cut and paste across that. Image editors, you need quite a few, really. Adobe Creative Cloud would be your go-to suite here for your image editing. We use, for us, we use Pixel Editor and a Vector Editor, so that we can do as SVG files. SVG files are really nice in LT because they give you a nice crisp look to your experiment. The scale well. Wherever we can use vector images, we use vector images rather than pixel images. But obviously there's quite a lot of pixel images you use, particularly when you're recycling PowerPoint and that. And a really quick and dirty image editor for just doing color correction, cropping and scaling images, really useful. For me, I tend to use open source software. A learning, that's a learning thing because I've used those for quite a long time. So I tend not to use Creative Cloud. So I'm using things like Inkscape for SVGs, GIMP for pixel editing, Earthenview as my sort of quick and dirty editor. Use Blender for video, and Handbrake as a video transcoder. And then for the Word and the spreadsheets, use Microsoft Office. On screen, you can see we do quite a lot of table and spreadsheet work within our experiments. And on screen, there's a team-based learning readiness awareness test. That experiment uses around 42 tables that are interlinked across the experiment, and we develop the calculations in Excel, and then we copy them across into chart because it seemed to be quite difficult to work to get all the formulas worked out within chart within LT. Sorry. As I say, the quick and dirty image editor is quite useful. Stops you spending a lot of time in the larger editors diddling about with all the menus and things that you need to do things. Quick and dirty, really useful. So what are we doing next? So working with LT this year, it's clear student interactions with on-screen instructions have changed considerably since we started doing our Lab Tutor work. And obviously we copied most of that across to LT. It's probably because students are using phones more, so they've changed the way they interact with software. So we need to look at what we do with that, how we can facilitate that new way of interacting. So we probably need to look at more video based instruction in his experiments, and a more graphical, more imagery to guide students into what to do. We need to look at grading in LT. For life sciences, so the university does have online marking aspirations, but for LT it's an academic decision as to how we decide what content goes into LT. At the moment we're predominantly data acquisition based lessons, so we're applying theory learned prior to a practical lab session. So we don't have much theory in his laboratory sessions. And traditionally, we generate reports, or students write reports on their experiments, and that's how we've been assessing work. So we've not had much need within LT to do any grading. We don't do much for life sciences. I think when as academics have time, I think we need to look at seeing if we can do more marking. We could do some more pre-lab sessions in life sciences. Again, because lectures generate more of the theory. We don't, for life sciences, we don't do much of that theory within our LT. So as pre-labs are less important at the moment. But I think LT is a good platform for delivering some of that theory. And we are probably, for our next set of experiments, we're going to start to look at more histology type lessons. So the histology is something that we started on a different platform, but we're going to try and move it across to LT. We do have a little bit of a problem with trying to adopt this. There's a little bit of an issue around people feel that LT is trying to replace teaching with microscopes, and we sort of need to get into a situation where we can say, we can tell them that we're trying to supplement the teaching rather than to replace the teaching, so that we're trying to give consistency for students, so that instead of students, whilst we're doing assessments on them, they're all looking at the same slide rather than different slides through microscopes. So there's a little bit of consistency across there. I think this is really where we start to look at moving away from the laboratory, and I think it's going to be quite a useful thing. We're doing quite a reasonable amount of work so far, but we're not quite there yet. So that's where we are, and that's what we've got to. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Darren, so much. It was a great presentation. I think there was a couple of points you raised, which would be great kick-off points for the hack hour session we're running after this, in terms of features you might like to see in the future. We haven't got any questions in the Q&A panel, but if anybody wants to type a question in, or if anybody wants to raise their hand, then I'll be happy to open your mic and you can ask Darren directly a question. So Darren, we've got a question in the Q&A. If you hit the Q&A button, then if you hit the answer live, and can answer those questions.
Yeah, they're just popping up now.
Yeah.
I think, from my point of view, any other subject areas we like to see in LT, I think LT is really flexible. We can use it anywhere in life sciences. So we can use it in archaeological sciences, we can use it in forensic sciences, we can use it in chemistry. We've done a little bit of work in chemistry to show them what we can do. So basically anywhere. I think that the platform's really flexible. It's a good way of delivering sort of media content. So anywhere would any subject would suit itself to LT. And Since you have lots of labs, is it possible to share them with others? I suppose we have one of those issues that's sort of a perennial one as to what does the university consider itself as property. So for me personally, I would be really happy to share as our lessons, but we just need to run that through the university to make sure that they're happy with it. And know there's a significant difference between the Scottish users, who seem to have a lot more freedom around how they share their work. But I think here in England we have a different mentality in these institutions. But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share about them and talk about them. Whether we can actually share the physical things, not sure about that. And Rosie, what kind of practicals have you done for pharmacology using LT online? So we have sort of a mix and match. So we do lots of respiration experiments. As I say, so we do the standard volumes, and then we expand on those sort of respiratory volumes, so that we do some restricted breathing type experiments, some rebreathing type experiments. We've expanded that to use our injectile inhaler simulator, where we look at the difference in respiration around inhalation. We do lots of standard sort of ECG. On screen at the moment we've got iStan. For our ECG experiments, we expanded that to use iStan now. So what we do is the students measure their own ECG, they look at their own ECG, and then they go to iStan and they record a set of ECGs from iStan. So they look at abnormal ECGs from iStan. The nice thing about using iStan is that the students can, whilst they're making the recordings, they can chat to each other, they can talk about the trace, they can see it in real time. And it's got that human interaction, because iStan, our patient simulator, people do feel like he's a real person. So that's a really nice, a nice thing. We do urology in a pharmacology, and blood pressure and heart sounds. Most of it is human physiology. So from Derek, do you have any feedback from students that have with disabilities about how they find using LT? No, we don't have any direct feedback. When we built our laboratories, we built workstations into our laboratories to accommodate disabled users. And when we've used LT, we've not had to use any software to assist disabled users. So we haven't got any feedback. It may be that later on we can have a word with Raj and see if Raj has got anything that we can expand on there.
I think we've got a couple of people that want to ask questions directly. So Sam, maybe if you go first, and then Mero after that.
Oh, hi Darren. I just wanted to, if you could talk a little bit more about the relationship between LT and Canvas, and how you guys are kind of maintaining that seamless learning experience for students without the LMS integration enabled.
So without the LMS integration enabled, as I say, from the way that we teach, we use laboratory reports to assess students' work in laboratory. So the students take the data away, write a report and submit a report. So they will be using Canvas to do that submission, and they'll be using Turnitin for that submission. From a student management point of view, we don't, because we haven't linked the integration to the courses, we don't manage students, so we manage students manually as far as inviting them to LT. So there's not much interaction that we need to do between as LMS and LT. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you.
And Mero, sorry, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. Perhaps you could unmute and ask your question as well, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, I had a similar question about integrating the Canvas learning management system with the LT, and I think it has been addressed. Thank you.
Right, okay. And Raj has just pointed out that from a student's feedback point of view, we do have some general feedback from the students. So we, as I say, when we started with our tutor, we surveyed our students to see whether how the students liked using technology in the laboratories. The students were really happy with this technology, even with those disasters that we had. And I haven't seen the feedback from this year's students yet, so I'm not sure what student feedback is on LT. The feeling from being in laboratories with LT is that our crossover was relatively seamless. We didn't seem to have any issues raised from students around our delivery, but real feedback, I've not actually seen any just at the moment.
Perfect, thanks Darren. I think we answered all the questions for now. I'm just going to post in the chat. So we're, again, as yesterday, we're moving from this session to a Zoom meeting for the 11 AM session, so we can use the breakout rooms to split you into groups. So I've just posted the link for that meeting in the chat. You should just be able to click through that link. We've got about 10 minutes, so everybody can just pop off and have a quick break and then rejoin the Zoom meeting session for 11 AM, please. Thanks again, Darren. Much appreciate the time to prepare and present your talk. It was really instructive. Thank you.
That's fine. Thanks, Marcus. Not a problem.
All right, I will close this webinar now, and then we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully all on the meeting that I just posted.